is on. Hi, everybody. Hi. I wanted to go ahead and get started. We're so pleased that you're all here. We have several different groups here. Many of you are connected to OU in one way or another, either students or faculty. Many of you are community members. We really appreciate having you here. And the OU Economics Club. Big shout out to the OU Economics Club. This is kind of informally kicking off their spring. I couldn't think of a better way to kick off their event. We're really happy to have a great topic. And what I'm going to do to get things started is introduce kind of our MC, our coordinator for the event, Miss Lily Albrecht. So I want to give you a little bit of information about Lily. Lily is a senior here at OU. She's majoring in economics, go Econ, woohoo, with double minor in accounting and sports business. It's a busy schedule. She's passionate about the connection between sports business and economics. And for as long as she can remember, she's been a huge NBA fan, go Thunder, right? Doing well. And is interested in using her degree and her skills to eventually go into sports and labor market related positions and potentially work with a professional sports franchise. It's exciting stuff. Here at OU, she's the president of the swim club. She's also a regular volunteer for the Safe Haven Animal Rescue, which is really awesome, very cool. For that, she's worked in several incredible positions, including internships for PricewaterhouseCoopers for the past 2 summers, where she was in the consulting side of the firm. And currently, she's a student assistant for the sports science department, actively working with the football team, including going to the Alamo Bowl, which is a really exciting opportunity, very neat, and is really kind of working at the intersection of using data analytics and sort of modeling techniques to try to live track player performance and athlete recovery, which is really exciting. So I could use a little help there to understand why I don't recover from the tennis points as well as I used to. I think that's just aging, probably. I don't know. Yeah. And this fall, she's going to be pursuing a master's in sports and data analytics here at OU. So since Lily is such a big NBA fan, I'll try to do this in my sort of best NBA introduction kind of style, right? So please join me in welcoming Miss Liliana Lily Albrecht.
All right, thank you, Dr. Birch, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, Dr. Rogers, and everyone here for having me. The privilege to moderate this panel. I will say it is my first time, so please give me a little slack. But we're all just doing the best we can up here. Well, with that being said, I would like to thank our panel on behalf of the OU Econ Club and everyone in the audience. Thank you so much for being here. We are very excited to hear what you have to say this evening. So let's get started. So first off, I'm going to introduce each of our panelists, starting with Dr. Burge. Dr. Burge is a professor and chair of economics at OU. He came to OU in 2006 after earning his PhD in econ at Florida State University. He now proudly wears the crimson and cream. Sure. Burge also chairs the City of Norman's University North Park Tax Increment Finance Oversight Board. He specializes in applied microeconomic analysis, focusing primarily on topics in urban, public, labor, education, and housing economics. His research has been published in top econ journals, including the Journal of Urban Economics, Journal of Labor Economics, Journal of Regional Science, Journal of the American Planning Association, Regional Science and Urban Economics, Real Estate Economics, and National Tax Journal, and apparently many others that I don't even know. So, to say the least, he has a very impressive resume, as all the panelists do. Next, Dr. Brett Norwood, as many students here know, is an assistant professor of econ here at the university. He completed his PhD in econ from OU in 2020 and was an assistant professor at Oklahoma State University before returning to OU. So just take it from him, Norman's better. Norwood specializes in teaching the large introductory courses, including macroeconomics, microeconomics, and statistics. He also teaches sport economics and was honored to be one of Coach Venable's guest coaches. His research interests are education, housing and public policy, and marijuana legalization. Alrighty. Dr. Travis Roach is an associate professor and chairperson of the Department of Economics at the University of Central Oklahoma. He is also the founding director of the Central Policy Institute, which is an interdisciplinary research center housed in the College of Business. Roach's research interests are in the fields of economic policy, environmental economics, labor economics, and industrial organization. His research has been published in top field journals such as Energy Economics, Education Economics, Economic Inquiry, Energy Policy, Climate Change Economics, and the Journal of Economics, Race and Policy. He has been featured in newspapers locally and around the world. He was also cited in a recent EPA report on the Climate Change and Children's Journal, I think. Maybe. Close enough, sorry. So, all the journals. All right, and last but not least, Dr. Lee Stitzel is an associate professor in the Paul and Virginia Engler College of Business at West Texas A&M University. He's an OU alumni, completing a PhD economics in 2016. Stitzel's research interests include public, regional, environmental, and sport economics. He has been published in the BE Journal of Economic Analysis and Policy and the Journal of Sports Economics. His research agenda is focused on the studies of economics of the residential water use, local public finance, and sport economics. Round of applause for our panelists. I would like to start this discussion by having each of our panelists take a few moments to discuss their particular expertise and their own personal take on the cost-benefit analysis of the proposed University North Park Arena.
Sorry, we're trying to decide if we're going to sit or stand. Stand? Oh, okay. All right, stand. Don't do that. All right. Well, thank you, Lily, for that wonderful introduction. As was mentioned, I sit on the City of Norman's Citizens Oversight Committee for the UNP TIF, and have for a number of years. So one of the things I wanted to do is just start with the basics, right? Like, what is a TIF, right? And many people in the room I know are familiar with what a TIF is, but it's a tax increment finance district. It's geographic in nature. The current City of Norman UNP TIF is kind of behind me here in a picture. I'll talk about that in just a little bit. As we think about, sorry, I don't know where to stand. Like, wherever I stand, I'm kind of blocking it a little bit. Maybe I'm going to migrate over here. Okay. So the City of Norman's TIF is nothing new. We've had it in place for a number of years, since 2006. It's located physically north of Robinson Road in North Norman and south of Tecumseh Road. It sits just to the east of the interstate, just to the east of I-35, and just to the west of the Max Westheimer Airport. So you guys have probably all driven through it. It's the Crest, it's the Super Target, it's Academy Sports, all of those sorts of places. A tax increment finance district funnels a portion of the revenue that's generated in a particular area, whether that's sales taxes or whether that's property taxes, there are different flavors, into the site itself. And our current UNP TIF has lots of infrastructure and Legacy Park and a number of very important improvements to that economic development zone that have been been generated by the tax dollars that all of those retail establishments that you see in the UNP TIF have generated over the past decade and a half plus. What we're here to talk about today is sort of a proposed development for an arena, like a sort of a sporting-based or event-based arena that has been sort of talked about over the last handful of months, and it's just kind of coming to a point where some of the details are emerging. So I just have some of the basics here. I think as we go through the evening, we're happy to address questions, but here are some of the simple parts. The northern half of this proposal is going to be mostly residential development. So a lot of this would be high-end multifamily units. So you're thinking really nicer, newer stuff that's really attractive to young professionals. Some single-family homes, but the majority there is on the apartment side, the multifamily side. So that would all be sort of these. I don't know. I should sort of kind of point it out here, but that would all be these kind of like northern parts that are close to Comstock. The southern part is kind of, I think, what we're mostly focusing on in terms of the mixed use and the arena itself. So you can kind of see visually the sort of the red, I don't know, kind of octagon-ish kind of a thing that looks like an arena is the location that's being proposed. It sits just to the north there of the I-35 kind of access strip and just sort of near the Rock Creek Road overpass. It is proposed to be between 8,000 to 9,000 person capacity. Just for a frame of reference, Lloyd Noble, that sits just a little bit less than a mile south of here, is a little bit bigger than that. It is envisioned as hosting OU basketball, also gymnastics and other events. Think concerts, things like this. Going along with kind of this proposal, right? It's mixed-use development. There would be additional retail, additional sort of office space, and so those are some of the basics of what's being proposed. Then it all kind of comes down to financing. So this is a big lift. The stadium or the arena itself is envisioned as being probably in the $180 million to pushing up higher, $200 million range. There's also quite a bit of needed infrastructure improvements because you're going to have transportation issues. You put in something as big as an arena that can hold 9,000 people, you better deal with traffic flow and those sorts of things. So that's envisioned as about another 40 million. So how do we get there? I mean, so we'll talk a lot more about this, and all of us will have our take on this. But University of Oklahoma doesn't just have $200 million laying around where they could just write a check, and neither does the city of Norman. And that's okay. Deals get financed all the time, and that's what we're basically talking about, is a financing deal where money would be borrowed. The sort of the collateralization of that loan would be the future revenue of the TIF itself. In this particular proposal, the tax increment finance would be 100% of the capture of growth, which, since this area is basically starting from green grass, would be everything. So if you build a house or a multifamily apartment complex, the property tax revenues that would be generated from that build are essentially what's being talked about, as well as all of the other sort of mixed use developments that go into that. Those TIF revenues would be collected over a number of years moving forward and go to pay off the construction loan. Essentially, now this is a public-private sort of partnership. The OU Foundation is very much involved. They have fundraising goals. I've seen different figures, but sort of one of the latest pieces of information suggested they're going to try to raise about $25 million. That's a lofty goal, but OU's good at raising money. Don't know much of the details if that involves naming rights, long-term commitments, all those sorts of things I think are still potentially out there to be worked out. And then there's the land donation. So the actual land itself that is being envisioned as where this would be physically located is currently owned by OU. There's some other sort of kind of details that we could get into, but at the end of the day, this is basically the proposal. So I think that was sort of the lead-in that I was kind of envisioned as covering, so that can kind of like kick it off, and then go ahead and move it on to the next person. Awesome.
Okay. Well, thank you to Dr. Rogers and to Dr. Birch for inviting me down here. I'm an associate professor of economics up at the University of Central Oklahoma, which from here is quite the drive. You might be wondering, why is a guy from Edmond down here talking about our stadium? And I honestly have the same question. In fact, I got kind of thrown into this discussion when the new arena in Oklahoma City came up, because that's actually where I live. I live in downtown OKC. I live pretty much near the fairgrounds. And as the arena in Oklahoma City started being discussed, you could just see it on the horizon. Our mayor was just waiting to talk about an economic impact that was going to magically occur, but for this stadium. If we don't build it, then OKC might just go into ruin. If we do, it should be the shining city on the hill. And I know enough from background research that we've seen new stadiums come across. We've seen new developments. We've seen Olympics be hosted. We've seen sports teams come and go. And we can monitor economic impact before and after these events. We're actually really good at using statistics to see what kind of policies or changes happen. And the boring answer is basically nothing. And so me, citizen of Oklahoma City, that happens to have a PhD in economics and has this in my background, is like, hey, wait a second, we don't need to be putting $1 billion toward a new arena. And so that's how I got to meet my friends from OU here. I actually, I got my doctorate at Texas Tech, so west of here, and I'm from Austin originally, so south of here, but I hesitate to tell any of you any of that. But I am a fan of OU, and I'm a fan of Norman. I gotta admit, my wife and I come down to Norman all the time because we love being in a college town again. Living in Oklahoma City, you don't really get that. Edmond, if you've ever been up there, it's not a college town. It's really just a suburb. And so the spirit of Norman, the impact of being here and being able to be a college student, go to a college team, that matters a lot to me. Something I'll probably speak to a little bit later is why this might be coming up for the leaders in this community. Because if I'm an economic development person, if I'm in charge of trying to grow my tax base, well then every plot of land that doesn't currently generate sales tax, I look at it with dollar signs. Because that's the only way that our localities in this state are able to generate sales tax for themselves. We don't really have property taxes like we do in Texas. Those are much higher there than they are here. So sales tax is a big driver of local economic development or local economic tax revenues. But that little spot north of Target is kind of a weird one. You would never put in new development there because you're going to face a lot of competition from targets out there. So if you think about it, what kind of commercial opportunity really would want to go there? So it's a little bit of a dead space. And if I'm a university administrator and I am facing the new reality of having NIL, I'm facing the new reality of having an aging stadium, and I'm thinking, how best do I fund a stadium? Looking for a public-private partnership does make some sense. So I can understand from the administrator side and from the city official side why this seems like a good deal. Again, the economics do not point to it causing any real change or growth in our area. So I'll leave it to that. I don't want to take everyone's firepower there, but let's give it to Dr. Lee.
So thank you to Dr. Rogers and Dr. Burge for having me. So I'm here because I'm a sports economist. I research and teach on the impact of sports stadiums and what they do in their local economy. So I want to address three things. If you get my slides here, three quick questions that I want to address, kind of things that would obviously pop up in the course of this conversation. One of those is to just kind of contextualize this deal in the context of the SEC in general. Second, to talk about the potential bump in attendance from going to the SEC. And then third, sort of, is there a potential benefit from having a more high-profile team and these kind of things called the advertising effect. So first, very quickly, what I've done here is I just got a little table for us to look at that looks at all the different stadiums that are in the SEC. These are organized from largest capacity to least. Of course, the University of Kentucky is just on a whole other level in terms of college basketball in general, but even especially in the SEC. First thing I want to draw your attention to here is the capacity. What I've shown here is OU and Texas. They are on here, but the averages are calculated at the bottom don't include those numbers. You can see that they're sort of on the lower end, but pretty close to the middle in terms of total capacity. The new arena would be one of the smallest. That would be in here if OU goes forward with this project. Next, when these are open, you'll notice a lot of these stadiums are actually quite old. Of course, as I've noted on the right hand here, many of them have gone through a lot of renovations and a lot of quite very expensive renovations. There's also some interesting things in here. A bunch of these obviously have a lot of donation support. And then there's actually a few in here that are like funded through some other ways, like Georgia being funded by some agricultural companies. Next, what I'd like to point out here is the construction of these is just almost universally privately funded. The universities and their foundations are funding most of these things. Sort of the two exceptions would be Rump Arena in Kentucky, which is part of an area that they developed there in Lexington, and then Texas, which sort of is listed as public-private, but there's actually kind of a developing corporation that's a part of that. Okay, so we see that private funding And relatively, relative to college basketball, these are quite large stadiums would be the norm in the SEC. The other thing I'd like to point out here is the average cost, and of course I've corrected these to 2022 figures here, is that the average is $86 million funding for these kind of projects. So we're looking at, OU is potentially talking about building a very small stadium in an unusual circumstance with public funding being involved, and a bill that would be quite a bit above what our funding would have normally been in this situation. So just kind of give you some context there for what we're looking at in terms of SEC stadiums and where OU would fit. Now, the natural thing, if you give me the next slide, the natural thing would be to think, well, maybe we're going to get some benefit. You go to the SEC and you get this attendance bump, but you're in the Big 12. You're in the Big 12. The Big 12 has, out of the 5 power conferences, has by far the highest attendance rate. Of course, we're all good economists in the room, so our instinct would be what? Well, that of course depends also on the capacities here. So we've seen the average capacity is around 14,000 in the SEC. In the Big 12, that's around 12,000. But we still see quite a bit higher average attendance in the Big 12 than the SEC. My guess would be you're not going to see a big bump in attendance to OU basketball from going to the SEC. Okay, last thing I'd like to touch, if you're giving me the slide, is what we call the advertising effect. Okay, so there's this notion that maybe a team does well, and then that advertises for the university that supports that team, and then we get this big bump in all sorts of things. The sports economists have measured this in a lot of different ways. I'm not going to go through all of this just so you can kind of see them here, but potential donations to the school, the quality of the student that applies, et cetera, et cetera. And I take this from a paper by Bauman and Zimbalist, where they summarize the literature saying, overall, the literature on the impact of college sports success on the quantity and quality of applications, enrollments, donations to the athletics department and general fund, and state appropriations is mixed and somewhat inconclusive. When significant results have been found, they've tended to be small in practical magnitude. So just a quick recap then, I would say this deal is a relative outlier relative to SEC stadiums. I would say we should not expect a big bump in attendance from the SEC. And finally, I wouldn't expect any large advertising effect benefit to OU from building this arena. Thank you.
Howdy, howdy. I am Dr. Brent Norwood. I teach sports economics here at OU, but in general, I'm more of an applied micro, specifically the spatial analysis. And so what that being said, what we've seen a lot in the literature with the impact that a new arena has on the economics of local municipalities actually has a big dissipating effect. So like we brought in Paycom, right around Paycom had a nice big bump, or whatever sports team, but as you dissipate out, as you get farther and farther away, that effect drastically cuts off, while the tax impact is pretty much the same all across. So a couple places around the U.S. have come to try to curb this. So in Seattle, they actually have a higher tax rate the closer into the stadium to absorb some of those costs and offset it to people that are farther away. So that, because they are seeing the greater impact of a new facility. Now, specifically with colleges, it's kind of up in the air is what we've seen. What do I mean by that? Like, attendance to games is not universally the same across different colleges. I'm an Aggie, and so it was frowned upon if you left A&M football game early at all. People stayed the entire time. I stayed the entire time, and I went to A&M and I sucked. All right. So trust me, I wanted to leave, but we did. And you guys here at OU, what I've noticed when I came here is that by the end of the third quarter, the student section is dead. They're already gone. And so if you're looking at like attendance of a new facility, of a new stadium, it depends on the school and the general normality that is the school, and do they stay the whole time, or do they leave and they go to Campus Corner? Because that was, like I said, Oklahoma's dependent on sales tax, so that would increase sales taxes there. Or do they dissipate and go out? Right? So that's kind of the variable. And specifically with OU, and seeing that most of our students attend and leave at halftime or don't come, That's a big impact, especially when this new stadium is farther away from campus. All right, like Lowell Noble's here, Campus Corner's here, all that stays local, all that. But when you have to travel, okay, that might have a bigger impact given that our student body doesn't stay the whole time. So it might be a deterrent for them to go, or because it's a new fancy development and they're next to more local bars, they're next to all the Target, the Starbucks right there, it may encourage them to more. So time will tell on that. We would need to do a deeper analysis with schools that are more like us, that develop an arena that's farther off campus than is locally on campus. So that's something that we have to look at both sides of the story on. But in general, what we see with the new construction is that spatially, that as you get farther and farther away, the positive impact that you might think would be there isn't there, because it's going to be localized strictly around it. And then also, which I know a lot of my colleagues all know, that when you go to an OU game, gate receipts, the ticket sales don't go straight back to OU. They go back to the Big 12. All the schools go back, and then we basically count all that money up and divvy it up individually. So specifically with football, some years it costs us more money to go to a bowl game than we actually make from the bowl game. So like last year with the Cheez-It Bowl, it cost OU Athletics more money to go and play than they brought in, because all of our bowl money we get doesn't come to OU. It goes to the Big 12, and then it gets split up amongst all the teams. And so, that's why we're trying to switch to the SEC, or we are switching, because I believe the average Big 12 team gets about $4 to $5 million a year from all the profit sharing, and the average SEC team gets about $16 to $18 million a year. So that then has this economic, domino effect that we're getting more money, we can improve our facilities with all this extra revenue, we can bring in bigger athletes, and that's kind of a compounding thing. So, but yeah, that's all I got on that.
Alrighty, thank you very much for all of those intros. So just for the audience sake, kind of what we're going to do now, I am going to ask each panelist an individual question, and then Dr. Rogers and I will come around and collect your cards, and then we will read as many as time allows. So to get started, Dr. Burge, you serve as chair of the University North Park Tax Increment Finance Oversight Board. How will the proposed development impact Norman's economy? Will it be an economic driver, as some have suggested?
Okay, great question. Really important, that's a big question, right? That we need to think about. So I kind of wanted to take, kind of as a way of building on what Dr. Norwood was saying about how the effects have been shown to dissipate geographically as you move further and further out from the stadium. I wanted to focus on the passing of time, because one of the cool things in this literature that really addresses, what economic impacts does it have on localities when big things are built, right? Whether it's a stadium or whether it's a big new housing development. One of the interesting things is that it matters, are you focusing on the short run or are you focusing on the long run? So if the city of Norman takes $200+ million and throws it into constructing anything at all, it will have a boost on our local economy. Mechanically, and like by definition, while those construction activities are playing out. It will bring in workers, those workers will stay in hotels, those workers will buy food, and just all sorts of things will occur in Norman's economy in the short run while an arena is being developed that would not normally be there. So one of the controversies in the literature, kind of to my way of thinking, stems from studies that really focus on that, right, that bump or that boost, versus studies that take a different approach, which is, well, let's think about sort of sustainability and long-run economic growth. What happens to the community and the economy after that, right? And so in that viewpoint, I mean, like when you're asking that question, you have to think about the revenue generation and the overall economic activity as it compares to what you had before, right? As it compares to the world prior to building the new big thing. And this is where it really, it really matters a lot in this particular case, because we have Lloyd Noble, we have basketball games, we have, revenues being generated, and people are, buying meals and staying at hotels and all of those sorts of things already associated with that activity. So then from an economic point of view, we start thinking about things like crowd out, right? Or what a lot of urban economists would call cannibalization. This idea that, if it's $1 that somebody's spending on a pretzel in the new arena, and that's just crowding out $1 that they would have spent on a pretzel in Lloyd Noble, that's not really economic growth. That's just sort of substituting, where things are happening. And so, now, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't look into the future and predict, but I can look at, empirical evidence that comes from other similar situations, and that's what, myself and a lot of my colleagues on the stage here are really familiar with. And we can, without a doubt, show that those impacts are found to be small and minimal, particularly in cases where we're sort of talking about this sort of a dynamic where it's just a rebuild of a situation where, the stadium is already existing, in sort of south side of campus, and those games are happening, and this is just kind of moving into another location. Now, will we get more concerts? Will we get more events? Possibly. I think from an optimistic point of view, they're certainly going to have marketing teams that are trying to attract and bring in events. It would be reasonable to conjecture that would lead to some gain, some increment. But then the question becomes, is it enough to justify the investment, right? Really, at some level, this is an economic investment for the city, and this is putting a lot of tax dollars to use for a very specific purpose, right? And so that's kind of, to frame our thinking and frame the discussion, we really have to think about what are we getting back? Is it enough? There are studies that show property values get a little bit of a boost when they're close to new builds, new arena builds, new stadium builds, right? So maybe the local housing market gets a little bit of a rising tide, kind of lifts all boats sort of an effect. Maybe we get that little boost in property taxes. Although, just as Dr. Roach pointed out, property taxes are really low here in Oklahoma, and so we don't have particularly high property tax levies. So that's where you really start thinking about sales taxes, and are you bringing in more dollars spent on sort of local bars, restaurants, hotels, those kinds of things. And maybe that will come. I'm not really in the camp that thinks it's going to be transformative and that it's going to justify a $200 million plus investment on the part of Norman taxpayers, but maybe I could be wrong. So that's kind of my take on it, yeah.
Thank you so much. Dr. Roach, you were engaged in discussions about the new OKC arena to house the NBA Thunder team. How will the new Thunder arena affect the cost benefit of a proposed new college arena in Norman?
Yeah. So not only do we have the new arena, but we have the old arena that hasn't been bulldozed yet. And just the other day, they approved an additional $30 million to go on top of the prior approved $40 million that will go to a arena just south of the other two arenas. So we have about 3 arenas within about a square mile near Bricktown. That's where the Energy FC allegedly will play. And then just kind of 3 miles to the west is over where the new Ron Norick Arena, which is on the fairgrounds. That's more kind of, I'm thinking rodeo, but they host other events over there. So from where the proposed site is, within about 17 miles, you will have 4 other arenas of similar or bigger size that are next to other entertainment districts, other hotels, other things to do. So I wanted to try and think this through, kind of like put on my industrial organization hat, kind of go, okay, well, what would happen? What would competition say would drive this? And one of the old school ways of looking at that is kind of this evolutionary biology way of thinking, is that what kind of support system exists for this stadium to be profitable? If we think from biology, if there's enough bushes for our deer to eat, the deer population will thrive. If those all get knocked out because of a winter storm, deer population will fall. Well, okay, if there's a lot of people in the area that you can sell tickets to and sell drinks to and sell hotels to, then it will be a profitable enterprise. And so it would crop up on its own. So it almost gives it away in the ask for public financing, is that if this was going to draw a lot of economic impact, if this was going to bring in a lot of new development dollars, they wouldn't be asking for money. Or at least they should be willing to still build the project after the fact if they're not approved for the $200 million here. And so I think that's where I get stuck with this, is that we're asking the public to take on a very significant portion of a building cost for something that, if they're right, if it does generate the economic impact that they're saying it will, it doesn't need it. And then the opportunity cost of that money is where I really get stuck. And you brought up an interesting point where we might see property values around this area increase. There's actually a really cool new study that just came out looking at high school stadiums and improvements in local, like think stadiums writ very small. And any money that goes into public expenditures on sports stadiums or things like that for a high school does tend to raise property values, does nothing for test scores. Any money that goes toward like filtration, air conditioning, things that fix the bones of the school actually lifts test scores. And so there are cost benefit, there are trade-offs to making these kinds of investment decisions. And so if it's an amenity that the citizens of Norman would like, then that's what they're voting for. But we have to take into account that there is a trade-off there, that there is an opportunity cost for making that decision.
Thank you very much. Okay, next, Dr. Stitzel. Your paper looking at the Thunder relocation looks into specific sectoral and geographic changes. Can you describe what you found and how this relates to a proposed arena in Norman?
Thank you, great question. So Dr. Rogers and I have a paper where we study what happens when the Oklahoma City Thunder moved, or the Seattle Sonics moved to Oklahoma City and became the Thunder. And what we looked at was, if you move a team into a specific area, how will it affect the businesses around it, and how will it affect businesses elsewhere in the metro area? That's that spatial component, that geographic component. And we looked at how will different sectors be impacted differently. So we broke down into sort of broad categories. Entertainment, as several of my colleagues have already mentioned, are going to be impacted by competing with. So if you have a movie theater, if you have a bowling alley, you have other things that you might be doing with your Thursday night, instead of going to see the Thunder play, you're going to be a substitute. If in the other types of industries, other sectors, will be complements in consumption with this. So restaurants, perhaps retail, things like this might benefit. And what we see in our paper is that there's an effect in downtown, in Bricktown, near the arena, where we see those type of things that are complements, they benefit, restaurants benefit. But restaurants that are further out, they actually lose from the Thunder moving to town. And we see the reverse with entertainment. So if you're a movie theater in downtown, you're hurt by the arrival of the Thunder. And if you're one out on the outskirts of town, then you might see a very small benefit. And the net effect of this is roughly zero, as Dr. Roach mentioned in his initial comments, right, is that we sort of see a general wash of the total effect. So what might happen then if we build a new arena for OU basketball and we put it in University North Park? Well, the expectation will be that we might see some of it mechanical, as Dr. Burge mentioned, and some of this might be related to those complements in consumption. We might see a benefit in that particular area. And actually, interestingly, there is a lot of research on real estate values. People do like sometimes being near these amenities. And so there might be people in that area of town that would benefit, but it will come at the cost of elsewhere in Norman, or even maybe elsewhere in like Moore, et cetera. So we'll see just in general a very specific sectoral effect and a very specific geographic effect. And so even if you might see some benefit right there near the arena, you're actually going to see an offsetting loss elsewhere further away from the new arena site.
Thank you very much. Dr. Norwood, you teach sports econ here at OU. What lessons about sports impacts on local economies does the sport econ literature teach us?
Good question. So, I know. So, yeah, very broad. So, yeah, it teaches us numerous things. Just to piggyback off what all my colleagues have been saying about this opportunity cost. If we're doing this 250, some odd cost of putting this in, it is, like Dr. Birch was saying, going to have a short impact. And I do think that Norman is unique, the fact that our local municipality goes right off sales taxes. We need it to bring in money. but in the cost of paying for that, bringing it in, developing here specifically in Norman, what could we have done with the money elsewhere? What could we have renovated? What could we have built that brings in sales tax that doesn't compete with other sectors right then and there? So that's that. But whether the literature is about colleges and sports, it goes back to being, it depends on the school. It depends on the fan base. It depends on the area. Because they're all so unique. It's different in the collegiate world than it is in the professional world, because when they moved from Seattle to Oklahoma, they had to get approval through the league, all right? Because they don't want to oversaturate it. You can't really do that with colleges. College is already there. But really, it just kind of depends on the fan base. It depends on the perks around it, the transportation. And in Norman, we don't have the best public transportation compared to some East Coast cities or West Coast cities, where it's a lot easier to get around. Just because I'm weird and crazy, not only do I have a PhD in economics, I'm also the faculty advisor for 3 fraternities. And I know for a fact that they go to Lloyd Noble because it's here, and they go to Campus Corner because they can walk from Fraternity Row and Sorority Row right to Campus Corner and walk right back. It's right then and there. And so when it's farther away and they have to Uber or drive, that might be that marginal deterrent that keeps them from going, and instead posting up in the fraternity house with a keg of Busch Light and enjoying it there. So that would deter sales tax that would normally be spent at Campus Corner. So it's unique because in our past literature, and correct me if I'm wrong, we've never really seen analysis where the city's dependent on sales tax, to my knowledge. And so it'll be interesting to see, based on what it does, because I could see it being developed, because I know our college level students love Campus Corner, but for us people that live in Norman, we don't go to Campus Corner, okay? Especially me, because I don't want to be seen with my students and I'm trying to enjoy beer, and they're like, Norwood, So maybe having a new entertainment district might do it, but do we need an arena with this new entertainment district? What about we just developed a new district specific for people to live in Norman? Because if you've ever been in Norman in summer or winter, it's a ghost town. So, which we Normanites kind of like.
Alrighty, thank you very much. Kind of a follow-up on that, just because I gave you a broad question. What kind of talk has there been of, if this new arena does go through and it is built, what are the plans for LNC? What are they going to do with it? Has there been any discussion?
I've heard this. Yeah, numerous different, but I'll let Birch take it over.
Oh wow, thanks.
I honestly don't know. I wouldn't say anything that I've heard is more than speculative. I have heard of no formal plans to sort of take it down. I was having this conversation earlier in the day actually with Cindy. At some point, right, if it doesn't host a large number of events a year, it becomes sort of an economic nightmare to own and operate, because sort of the carrying costs of a facility like that don't go away just because it sits empty and isn't being utilized. So I don't know, honestly. I think those discussions are probably not happening as much as they should.
I think it's going to be like the Astrodome. I'm from Houston, and the Astrodome's still there. It just sits in. They don't want to tear it down because it was the first one with the retractable roof, but it does nothing. And so it just kind of sits there and collects dust, and it's a net negative. In fact, it's actually sucking local money to keep it somewhat efficient and not just deteriorate and be full of asbestos and mold.
Alrighty, wonderful. I think, Dr. Rogers, if you all could pass your cards to the middle.
Right, this is the fun part. This is what we've been waiting for. I know, right?
I mean, yeah.
I was gonna say, we'll just throw it around.
Okay, so this is for the two non-OU professors, so Burge and Norwood, you're off the hook. But what is the incentive of building the stadium for executives if it doesn't really affect economic development?
So there's actually quite a large literature in the sports research on why do we see the type of political activity that we see surrounding stadiums. And so there's actually a field in economics called political economy, in which we study political actors as self-motivated, self-interested people rather than sort of a benevolent ideal that doesn't really exist. And so it's actually quite common that we would see the dovetail of the two interests between teams and localities that want a stadium built with the politicians that are sort of in the authority of that particular time and place. And the reason for that is it's very difficult for me as a politician to run a campaign on I did nothing, or perhaps I lowered your tax bill by not building an arena. It's very easy for me to run a re-election campaign on look at all these nice stadiums that I built you and I brought you this team, etc. So there's a political component here in which it's very easy and it fits very well for the political actors in that environment to have benefits from doing the kind of things that the team, or in this case the university, would like built.
So I can speak more to the Thunder's case. And for them, it's a revenue sharing agreement issue where by putting new box seats, by putting restaurants into the arena, they're able to capture money directly that otherwise would have gone off to the league and then split out to everyone else. So it is a way for the ownership group to capture more of the fan money. Think Disneyland, right? They don't have restaurants outside of Disneyland. They're all inside of Disneyland. That's what we're trying to do. To the political aspect, this is a lot like what we see with movie and film credits. Those cause basically zero economic activity, but it does look great if you're a politician, if you could put your arm around, who was it? Robert De Niro was around recently. We've had several big names in Oklahoma. Looks great on a campaign ad. Says you're doing something. And so I think that matters too. And then just the pure, if this is going to be profitable and someone can take over a major chunk of your big expense, then it becomes more profitable. Why wouldn't you try and do that?
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much. So our next question kind of, I think, is a little related to what y'all just talked about. But is there a particular economical reason that the construction of sports arenas has become very apparent in Oklahoma rather recently? It seems to kind of be a rather sudden trend. So what kind of competition has brought these projects to occur at one time?
A year ago, I would have told you low interest rates.
I was going to say, so compared to a lot of other parts of the United States, the OKC, and sort of broadening that out to sort of Dallas, North Texas area is very economically thriving for many different reasons. I mean, not trying to exclude sports, but for reasons that don't have a lot to do with sports. We are in a region of the U.S. that is adding population, adding economic growth, sustained building is going on in lots of sectors, right? So we could say the same thing about, there've been a lot of new schools in this sort of Dallas, Oklahoma City kind of area, or a lot of new restaurants, or a lot of new, fill in the blanks. Also kind of like what was kind of talked about earlier, like when we think about what's been going on in sort of like Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and other places as well, a lot of stadiums that got built many decades ago have gotten old enough to the point where it actually makes economic sense to replace them, right? I mean, once you're dealing with a 40-year-old, stadium that's outdated to a particular level, it does sometimes make sense to just start from scratch and build a new one. And a lot of stadiums were built back in the 70s and 80s, like when I was a little kid. So that, I think, potentially that's reasons why we're seeing such a flurry. And then also, I mean, if you're going to talk about Oklahoma City specifically, it's definitely the Thunder effect. I mean, we've gotten an NBA franchise, and we've had them now for a while, and that's a new thing. So.
Yeah. I'd also like to say that specifically in OKC, they started the MAPS project. So if you go back a couple of decades, Bricktown was barren, right? And we lost a lot of investment into the state. And so they made those incentives to invest, and that attracted more and more people to come in and start, firms and businesses here, which has a domino effect. As they have more firms, you have more jobs, more local spending, more sales tax growth. And I just think in general, Oklahoma is starting to catch up to what Texas is, or the other big states. Norman's growing really fast, and I'm so happy for it. And OKC in general, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, fast, they were one of the top growing cities in the last census, whereas California lost a lot of people. And a lot of the places that California lost population was to Oklahoma and Texas. So especially important in Oklahoma, where we're dependent on sales tax, this growth is good. So I think yes, we need these new stadiums, but we're like catching up to the average that would be a Dallas, a Houston, an Austin area. And so that might explain why we're trying to grow and grow and grow. But when we grow, and as Travis pointed out, we have all these new stadiums so quick, we also have to remember that concerts are played there. They're also played at casinos. So it's not just competing with other arenas, we're now competing with Riverwind and WinStar and all these other local casinos that host some of the same events. I mean, not sporting events, but concerts.
Awesome. So now, Dr. Burge, like you mentioned, a lot of these SEC arenas were built before 2000. So this one is actually, directed to Dr. Norwood. I didn't read the end. Why can't LNC be updated like Gallagher IBA? Is that still? Skyber. So IBA, sorry, obviously not from here.
Why it can't be updated?
Yeah, why can't we?
It could be, it totally could be. But this goes back to the cost-benefit analysis, and I think Dr. Burge is pointing that out, that at a certain point, the cost to renovate it might outweigh the cost to just start from scratch and build it all new. And same thing, it's not just a stadium, it could be with the shed in your backyard or your home. Like if you're looking to renovate. What?
They did it at Gallagher, they renovated this arena.
Yeah, and so the cost to renovate it might be cheaper than to wipe it and build a new one. Because they could do that, they could wipe it out right now and rebuild it right in the same spot. But that might be more money than renovating it. So.
Yeah, so just real quick, show of hands, how many of you guys have been in Lloyd Noble in the last, say, year? Okay. So Lloyd Noble has had many, just once, really? Come on, you guys. All right. Okay. So Lloyd Noble is an older build, but it's been, in my opinion, well maintained. It's had infusions of dollars at many different points along the way. The big criticism is it doesn't have the luxury boxes. It doesn't have the special sort of restaurants on the landing. In many ways, it has too many seats. It's a people, you pack in the people. It's a physically large structure, and I'm not, we need people here from architecture, and they could address those sorts of elements here. But at the end of the day, doing a cost-benefit analysis on a completely new rebuild is going to be driven by how many revenues are you going to bring in, what dollars are going to be brought in. A cost-benefit analysis on a renovation gets at, well, how costly would it be? What would it cost to make Lloyd Noble something that looks a little bit more like what we're envisioning building? What would make it more modern? And that takes real money as well. But I absolutely think other universities have renovated instead of new builds. I mean, Lee showed it perfectly. You saw so many of those amazing stadiums are 50 and 60 and 70 years old. So it's absolutely doable, yeah.
Has there been any discussion of that? Or is it just, we're all or nothing?
We talk about it all the time.
I don't know anything about specifically talk of renovation here, but a lot of the SEC stadiums have had just tremendous renovations and even series of renovations where they're spending $20, $30, $40 million on these. There's absolutely no reason, in my opinion, that you couldn't do that. I don't even know if I would say it's a cynical take, but the reason that you wouldn't necessarily want to do a renovation if you're a political actor in this environment is then you can't put it in University of North Park. So that would be my take on it. Well, what I'm saying is the reason that you might not want to do a renovation if you're part of the political apparatus that's trying to make this new build is because then you can't put it in University of North Park.
Right. Which translates to
Which translates to you can't get the city taxpayers to pay for the cost, basically, it would be on the university.
But the flip side of that would be that if you did renovate it and it was bigger and it was fancier, and it might attract more outside people to come in that stay at a hotel locally, that would then generate revenue for the city. Maybe not as much as we would like to hope, but it's still would.
Awesome, thank you. All right, the next question is kind of twofold. So what alternative economic drivers could this $200 million plus funding go to that has positive long-lasting impacts? This is also, or the kind of the discussion here is about sports that Norman already has. What if there was a new weather museum or something like that built instead of National Weather Center update, things like that?
So what I teach, or when I am able to give a talk on this kind of thing, what I like to emphasize is you should not be advocating for building an arena, for building a stadium, anything like that, based on economic growth. It just, that is universally shown in the literature that you can't do that. You're not gonna see that. A stadium's not gonna pay for itself in terms of tax dollars, etc. If you want a new arena, if you want a new stadium, if you wanna attract a team to an area, you need to justify, this is a thing that I want, that we want as a city, that we're willing to pay for. This is an amenity we want in the city. We'd rather live in Oklahoma City with the Thunder than live in Oklahoma City without the Thunder, and we're willing to foot the tax bill to do it. So, you just personally, I don't think you're gonna find anything that you're gonna attach to the arena or bundle things together and get any kind of benefits outside of what are we doing in this arena, and is that a thing that we want to put on the taxpayers to support?
I might add that it's kind of, it's a philosophy point of view, that maybe we shouldn't expect the things that the government provides, like a park or a trail system, to be revenue generating. Maybe we pay taxes for the possibility of having those as parts of our lives. And so it's become this mindset shift that for politicians, for them to, you know, to convince the public that, yes, I'm spending your tax dollars well because look, it makes money. I don't think we should be asking that of our politicians, that, you know, we shouldn't expect a trail system. I saw this the other day. They talked about the economic impact of the trail system. Like, this is ridiculous. I see people on their bikes, they're having fun. That's all the impact you needed. And so I think that's why we see some of this push into stadiums, but then, you know, what other way might we spend these $200 million? Let your mind wander and figure out what things are you missing in your life that you might like to have. You know, and in terms of, you know, will it drive in new tax dollars? Probably not. If I'm a non-student thinking about how I might spend my night, I'm gonna go down to Norman to watch a basketball game. It's now 4 miles closer to me than it was before. Neat. I'm probably still gonna grab a drink near my house. I'm probably not gonna go to the stadium to get, it probably does not change my game day experience all that much. Now maybe I'm the outlier, maybe I'm the weird dude who's also an econ professor, and I prefer to eat at my normal restaurant, but probably this just made it easier for me to go to the stadium and come back and go to my normal hunts. And so I'm not sure that it brings in a lot of new money from outside areas.
Yeah, totally. I mean, just if I could add to that, I mean, like, as I'm thinking of that question, like, I sort of wish, like, Charlie Tibu was in the room, because there's this thing that's like 75 years old that we talk about in economics called the Tibu model. And basically, it's what residents value in terms of their everyday lives. So it's not always the exciting, sexy stuff like stadiums. It's like good quality public schools and like transportation infrastructure that helps you get around without a lot of traffic congestion. It's like safe streets, because we have, you know, economic opportunity, and, you know, and the sorts of ways we, you know, enforce, you know, our social norms and our laws are, you know, make sense to everybody, and everybody's in a community that's high quality of life. So it's, you know, it can be, like, you know, I mean, Travis is absolutely right. It could be a bike trail that people enjoy, that just is a part of living in a community that's high quality of life. So at the end of the day, people look for attractive places to live that are affordable, and that's also the kinds of communities that people love to bring their businesses to, because those are the sorts of communities that workers are attracted to live in. So if the question is what else, you know, could you spend $200 million on? I mean, it's literally just start with the basics. I mean, like, just think about the 3 or 4 things that communities have as their first priority in terms of providing high quality of life to their citizens, and that's where I would sort of think the money could be better Spent. Or lower taxes, yes, 100%. That's something I drop too. Lower taxes is the mic drop.
No, this is a good question because this is, it's the cornerstone of economics got from community gas. So what else could we have spent it on? And like you said, building a new stadium is not really going to have this big impact that we think it has, especially not in the long run. Maybe in the short run, the construction and the building and this and that. But what else could we have done it? I'm all in for maybe a new entertainment district here in Norman, all right? Because there's some place for us Normanites to go, and it's new businesses, new jobs. There could be some short, possibly even longer term. But what are we missing compared to my hometown of Houston? We're missing open green, acres, not acres, but open green spaces with little cafes and bars and coffee shops that they have on Thursday, Friday night during the summers, a local band playing and this and that, and a little jogging trail. Those are things that I think the city itself could grow on more than just this big stadium. But like you said, if we vote, we're a democracy, and if the city votes to have it in, then yeah, let's vote, let's build it. Just don't think it's like the field dreams if you build it, they will come.
Awesome, thank you. So the next question, what makes OU's circumstances different that they can't secure private funding for an arena like other SEC schools? Or are they just being opportunistic?
I mean, as far as those details go, there'd be nothing that I see that they couldn't do that. But put yourself in their shoes. If you could get tax funding from that, from the city that you're in, I mean, I forgot who said that, I think Dr. Berger maybe said that. If you pass some of that cost off on the people, that raises your profitability. So that would be the reason I would think they would do that.
Alrighty, awesome. Okay, is it wise to fund an arena before market feasibility study is done? If it is so good, shouldn't a study say it will pencil out?
I think there are too many unknowns. I think any study that purported to say that they did that and they have a good number for you is probably lying to you. Sorry to be the cynic there, but it's just, it is a black box. We can't know. We can take our best guess at it. We would have to take account of all of these factors, like what are the nearby competition? What are the complements and what are the substitutes to this development? I get stuck on this evolutionary biology idea. There's this thing called niche partitioning, which if you think like a tree, there's wildlife that lives at the bottom, there's wildlife that lives near the middle, and there's wildlife that lives at the top because they have their own food sources. And they're able to survive and move on because they have their own food sources. We would be guessing as to whether or not the OU Entertainment District, I forget what we're even calling it, would have its own food source. Then it would be self-sustaining without this.
And just to add on to that, I mean, I would sort of just reiterate a point that that Travis made earlier, which is that the private sector invests in projects all the time. I mean, there's lots of construction that's going on in OKC, Norman, other parts of our region, and private sector investors do a great job of modeling out and forecasting out what will generate revenues, what will generate enough revenue to justify their investment, and they are all about profitable projects. And so you don't typically, see a private developer, trying to argue and arm wrestle with communities to get, high-end, office space or great multifamily housing projects built, because they know if they fund it 100% of the cost and then they get to recoup 100% of the revenue, that it's going to have been a really wise economic investment. And that's simply not the dynamics of arenas. So it's like my colleagues already pointed out, that's not the right way to sort of think about this. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in that space where you need massive subsidies to sort of make it sort of a build that can actually happen.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Burr, since you have the mic.
Okay, yeah.
So how did the existing University North Park area impact Norman's sales tax, and did the TIF help or not?
It depends on who you ask. It's a lot of revenue was generated by the retail that went into the TIF. It certainly has been a growth area for the city of Norman's tax base. If you track the impact that it had on sales tax revenues collected outside of the UNP TIF. That's where you start seeing some of that crowd out. That's where you start seeing some of that cannibalization. At the end of the day, my own take on it is that that's not a hard slam dunk going either way. But what I will say is it's asking the wrong question. I mean, that's a great question, but to sort of reframe it, the right question is, what would have happened in the city of Norman if we could go back in time 16, 17 years and allow that area that we sort of now see as the UNP TIF to have been developed, but not under sort of a TIF, structure in other ways, right? There are many other developments in Norman that didn't come into the city through a TIF apparatus, right? Now that was a very unique instance because you had federal legislation that changed, sort of the entire landscape, right? I mean, so you literally had green grass in that area because of the Westheimer Airport and because of restrictions on, retail activity. And when that sort of regime went by the wayside and the federal government said, hey, you can build, it makes sense that it's a great location. It's right by I-35. I mean, it's surrounded by neighborhoods. There's lots of economic activity around it. So it makes sense that private sector investors were going to want to put retail and other commercial uses in that location. So the real question kind of gets down to, what would it have looked like if it would have developed, but not under the TIF mechanism. Now, I think the TIF has produced some really nice outcomes. I mean, it's a lovely area. I mean, I drive through it all the time. I shop there all the time. Legacy Park is phenomenal. It's also given the city an opportunity to add other really amazing pieces. I mean, the Trae Young Athletic Center is phenomenal. I mean, we got a chance to walk through that as the TIF board, and I think it looks amazing. And it keeps sort of a local high-profile superstar involved with our community. And I think there's lots of good things I think associated with that. I mean, it's a really generous way for Trae Young to stay connected to where he grew up. So I think there have been a lot of good things that have come from it, but I think it's a complex question to say the least. Yeah. Okay.
Since you mentioned the Trae Young facility, this question asks, they're predicting the future. So property owners north of Embassy Suites are claiming Adidas will be developing the new Young Family Athletic Center into their own national basketball hub for high-profile traveling high school teams. Could this boost the local economy or even compound with a new OU arena in the proximity? So kind of how would those two go together?
Shall I read what's going on? Well, you can. I mean, go for it. You be the best here.
Okay.
I was going to say, I was going to go middle of the road, but go ahead.
It may do nothing. It may grow some parts of the economy in that specific area. It will probably be drawing from dollars that would have otherwise been spent in other parts of the city. And so maybe it becomes a regional hub. Maybe this becomes a norm for basketball teams and schools to come through. It builds up a local base where the hotel you're going to stay at, where you're going to go. But that means the hotel that you used to stay at doesn't get your money anymore. So it ends up honestly being in a wash.
I'd like to comment briefly. One of the things we're talking about is lots of things related to sport. And sport's an important part of culture. And so what we're talking about with the Young Center is probably more interesting from like a cultural aspect. Like you said, maybe we get sort of a hub for basketball, similar to like Oklahoma City is often a hub for softball, etc. So you can have these cultural things. Anytime you're trying to push and sell these things based on economic growth, I think you're barking up the wrong tree. Because I'm with Travis on this one, you're not going to see economic growth or development there unless you just kind of get a one in a million event that just for some reason this becomes the place for all of our like high-end amateur basketball or something like that. It's not going to happen. But it might be an important thing culturally. It might be an important thing for what it is that Norman is about and what Trae Young and what University of Oklahoma is. That might be important, but I would just encourage people to we've got to justify this on economic growth or economic development grounds.
Alrighty. Do you have any other? Does anybody still have a note card? Okay. I have one more question, and then this one. Alrighty. So when it comes to potential for the sports venues, what plans are there? When it comes to potential cost overruns for the sports venues, what plans are there in Norman and Oklahoma City to tackle paying beyond those original estimates? Because we always know there's going to be some. So.
I can speak to Oklahoma City's. We passed a bill that I'm calling MAP 5 because it's not MAPs anymore. And it's a blank check. It says that the city will take full ownership of all cost overruns. I think it's gonna age like milk in the sun. You know, this is a $1 billion deal that, you know, what's to stop it from becoming a $2 billion deal? Think about the economic impact there. If there's no ceiling on that, that number can literally just keep climbing. We saw that with the new sports stadium that started at 40, now it's 70. They haven't put a shovel on the ground yet.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot to add to that. I guess I would just say the specifics of the proposal I've seen, there is a bit of a pullback from that blank check, only in the sense that the TIF agreement itself would be tied to specific sort of future revenue collections, and it would get into the weeds, and it would sort of say, this is the authorized amount. Now, you know, what happens when you get halfway through the project and it costs, you know, more than it, you know, was promised? I mean, yes, of course, somebody's still on the hook. I mean, there is a developer who would sort of take over, that would sort of have formed an LLC to do this. I don't want to get too deeply into the woods, but you know, there are no guarantees on what it would cost, and it absolutely, if it's like other builds that have, you know, kind of been, you know, played out, there's going to be more than what they say it's going to be.
Alrighty, wonderful. This is the last question I have. So earlier, the TIF plan was explained. Is that method of financing the best approach if, and if is underlined, the stadium was to be built? Alternatively, is there any way the stadium could be financed that you would support? Open question in parentheses.
So since I've got the microphone, I'm going to use it to bully you a little bit for a minute. So one of the things that we're talking about, should we do TIF, you know, should we have market feasibility studies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one thing that was correctly observed is lots of development things happen privately. And they happen privately not because there are studies that these people will do and have their own private process for doing things. Much of what happens in all of life, not just in economic development, in economic activity, in commerce and everything, this stuff is trial and error. We don't get to do a study and then know what is going to happen. These things have to be done by people who have skin in the game to make the thing work, and then to go and try their best, and then to succeed or fail, or succeed and then fail, or fail and then succeed, and do any number of combination of things that are their decisions and choices. I mean, think of the number of variables that can be in play, from placement to design to funding, on and on and on. And maybe a different choice at a different time would have led to success or would have led to failure, right? So this is why, you know, if you're in your Econ 101 class, the first thing your economics professor is going to do is start talking about how important and how beautiful the market process is, right? Because we get this feedback mechanism of prices and profits, right? And so one of the things that we got to be a little bit careful with here is saying, well, what is it, we should have this study, I should have this assurance of success before we get there. So is TIF the right thing? I'm sure Dr. Burge has some comments about the actual structure of that or whatnot. But one of the reasons that I would advocate for this being private, in addition to sort of the comments that I made initially, where look at the SEC, these stadiums are funded privately, is that puts skin in the game on the people whose job it is to make this thing sink or swim, and then they can make those decisions the way that they would see fit, and then we're going to see as this works out in trial and error. You know, we live, I think, in a world now where we're so accustomed to being able to look at some big double-blind study and think that we know the answer. But the reality is almost everything that we do, from an individual, you know, to a collective, to a economic, to a political apparatus, all this stuff is trial and error. And you have to work those things out and figure them out.
Just real quick, I mean, functionally, you could go general obligation bond, you know, would be the alternative, like to a TIF. You could just geo bond it. I mean, communities finance projects all the time, you know, for things that are, you know, deemed to be socially valuable, that the community wants and is authorized. And so that would be I mean, if you're thinking of a way to get it financed, you know, save the private sector financing it. If the government was gonna do it, they could tip it or they could geo-bond it, yeah.
Awesome. Any last comments from our panelists?
All right. So yeah, I keep going back to the one question that I was asked, of what else could we do with the money? And I know that we have a lot of elected officials here tonight. They have a very hard job to do with a lot of these. How do we make Norman grow? Especially given that we're in a unique position with our sales tax being our main revenue generator. And is a stadium the way to go as economic growth? As we all said, probably not. But I want to see Norman grow. Y'all want to see Norman grow. So what else could we do with it? What else could we renovate? What else could we build structurally that brings in that sales tax? What more an entertainment district that not only accommodates the student body, but the Normanite body? Because the Normanites, we're here year round. We're not just here in fall and spring and gone. We're here year round. So how can we build, more things that generate other outside firms to come in and to build, like in College Station at Research Park. So they have all these research facilities that go into College Station, they partner with A&M, and that brings in thousands and thousands of jobs and thousands of people that spend money in College Station. What can we do with all this money instead of an arena that might bring that economic growth we're looking for in the long term? And is a stadium it? In my opinion, probably not, but I believe in our elected officials and democracy, and if that's what they vote on, that's what we get, so.
When I came up back in December to go to Dr. Roach's event, one of the things the media asked me is, what do you think of the terms of the deal? And I think a similar reaction to the Thunder deal as I do to this is, I don't necessarily think this is a bad idea or a thing that should or shouldn't be done, but I'm really not impressed by the terms of the deal for the taxpayer.
I have two things that I want to kind of come back to. One is rounding back on this idea of like what otherwise might we do with this money. I think vocational tech schools do a lot of good, and there's a growing skills gap, and we have a growing gap in working professionals and having the apprenticeship system in place to have it. So incentivizing that specifically, I do think would actually cause some economic growth. And then thing two, to me, is just the student experience. I don't know, I have fond memories of my own college days. I was in the basketball band, and there's never been more beer drank in the world than the basketball band. So we enjoyed it, and I loved it. And I think back to Texas Tech, and before the big games, you had students who would pop up tents outside the arena to get the first seat in there. And you lose that with the stadium being 4 miles up the road where it's a drive to get there. I have equity concerns. Like if you're the type of student who you're lucky to get into OU, maybe you're here on scholarship, maybe you're here partly on loans, but maybe you don't have a car, and you're locked out of being able to go and visit a game of the school you go to. I don't love that. So full outsider here, I don't love it just for the student experience reasons alone.
Yeah, and Norman, you got first year's gotta be on campus dorm.
So I mean, these guys are so awesome, they kind of stole all my thoughts, so I'm gonna go a different route. And I just wanted to thank everybody. I wanted to thank you for being here. If you're an OU student, thank you for being connected to the university. Thank you for being connected to economics. If you're a community member who cares about what's going on here at OU, I think that's amazing. I wanted to thank our panelists. This is a really cool event for us to kick off as like an OU Econ centered event. I wanted to thank our moderator Lily, did an amazing job. Woo, yeah.
Thank you, guys.
And there really is one person that I have to thank above all others, the complete mastermind behind this whole event, and the reason we're all here. So my colleague and friend Cindy Rogers, she really put this together. She was I would point out has been putting together meaningful engagements between academics and community members for literally like her entire career, and I think that should be done a lot more, and I really appreciate that. So that's all I got. I wasn't going to say anything else about the tip.
Alrighty, well, this concludes our formal panelists. You're not trapped here, so you can leave, or you can hang out. I think we do have this room until 8 o'clock. If the panelists would like to hang around and you would like to ask them a personal question or anything like that, Thank you all so much for coming. Be safe getting home, stay warm.